All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another Sales Hacker webinar. I'm so excited to have you all here. I'm excited to be here. I'm a little sick, so my voice is froggy, but nothing's going to stop me from getting on the line with you lovely people. So today we have something really awesome and interesting for you. Today, I have Bill McDonald here. Bill is a serial entrepreneur, and he's the founder of Sales Engagement Partners. So Bill, first of all, hi. Thanks for being here.
Great to be here, Colin.
Yep, it's good to have you. And we've also got Dr. Georgette Clay. So Georgette is a master educator. She's a professor of communications. And the twist is she has a background in sales. So Georgette, Bill, boom, you've got some awesome sales insights. And we're going to get really into the weeds today. So we're going to talk about sales psychology and neurolinguistics. You know, we spend a lot of time talking about sales tech. Today we're talking about the people. At the end of the day, it's still a couple people, maybe more than a couple, that get a deal done. So we're going to talk about building instant rapport. They have some really cool tips. And at the end, they're going to give you a training exercise that you can do to become a pro just like them. But before we get into it, I want everybody to go down to the bottom of your screen and click the Q&A thing. Click that thing and say hi to us, because you joined the live version of this webinar for a reason, right? We're recording this. And we're going to send the recording to everybody that registered, but you're here because you want to talk to us. Hi everybody. Josh Hers, Mark Levine, Mike Jackson, Eric Gold. I can't pronounce your name. Last name Eric. Wow, so many great people. Lydia, Damien. It's a full house, guys. All right, so that's the box. You've got it open now. That's the box you use to put your questions in. We'll try to get everybody's questions answered because I know you're all going to have some good ones. Somebody bet me $5 I couldn't pronounce their name. They're probably right. Okay, without any further delay, I'm going to hand it over to Bill and Georgette.
Great, Colin. Thanks so much. And everybody, we're really excited. I see the numbers popping in here. So it looks like we have over 100 folks on here already. So this is really great. Georgette and I are very excited about hopefully, being able to impart some bits of our knowledge, some tips that we've learned, some of the stuff that Georgette has done from her studying, from her publications and other things. And the idea is to just give you, some grounding in what we consider like psychology of selling and some stuff with neurolinguistics, and then try to match that with real life activities that have occurred to us. And also, as Colin had said, what we're going to be doing is actually giving you an exercise, and this would be something that you hopefully can do with your associates, on the bus, in the car, in practice at lunchtime in different places, where some of the things we're talking about in the neurolinguistics and the mirror and the match and some of the other things we're going to get to later will actually will benefit you when you're actually face-to-face with a prospect or a client. If you've practiced this in advance, and hopefully what you're going to be able to learn is actually something that you can then in turn use. So the agenda for today is basically that we're going to be covering, just as I described, some of the sales skills using psychology, simple things. We're not talking about writing a thesis on this. We're talking about, using real life examples, understanding the personality. As Colin said, sales is back down to the person on the other side of the desk from you. So if you're in a room, you have a number of people, you have to understand that person's motivation. You have to understand what is it that this person wants out of this meeting. You're not just there to force something on that person. They have to be able to get something out of it. So you have to understand their psychology. What is it that makes that person tick? So again, and then how do you get that person on your side? How do you create the rapport? So those are some of the things that we're going to cover in here. Gaining advantage of using like linguistic patterns of persuasion. And Georgette's going to get into this, but Tony Robbins is somebody who's been made a living on using neurolinguistic patterns and has built a whole career around motivational speaking, about training and everything else. So we're gonna play around with some of those similar ideas. Then thirdly, we have something that I've coined, which is reversing the Napoleon complex. It's not the typical understanding of the Napoleon complex, the guy being 4'5" and worried about everybody being bigger than him and all of that stuff, and not having to stand next to people of bigger stature. What we look at this as something different, which is using things that Napoleon did either in winnable or losable situations, where he either won the battle or lost the battle, and then if so, why? So we're going to look at how you can actually, take some of the psychology that he would have used, revert that to something that's actually something that you can in turn put to your advantage for winning in a sales situation. And then obviously the best practice and implementation, we're going to give you a couple of exercises. Georgette's got a couple of fun things that she's done, riding on a train and a couple of other places. So, we're going to basically get into that, and hopefully, besides all of the, the deep thought on the linguistics and the neural patterns and psychology, we want to make this fun. We want people to walk away and say, this was great. Love the topic, love the ideas. And, this is something that I can actually take and practice in real life and go out and close more sales, which is, what each and every one of us wants to do. So
Yes.
just briefly who we are, as Colin said, I'm Bill McDonald. Currently, I'm the CEO, founder of Sales Engagement Partners. I've worked with a number of startups. I've been a salesperson, been out on the street, carried a bag, had the quotas, had the manager screaming, get your numbers in. I've also been a, VP of sales. I've also been a person who's been brought in to help train salespeople, help them get, the best out of what they have on their internal systems. And just in turn of, being able to, what I've done is want to take my experience and just be able to impart some of that. Over the years, before I did this, I just did a rough calculation. I've closed close to $500 million worth of business over my career. And that was done through adding up quotas and numbers. So I have a little bit of experience. Hopefully that'll help. Wasn't all in 1 year, because if it was, I wouldn't be sitting here. I'd be, that would have been a really nice commission check. But anyway, roughly about $500 million over the career. I've done this. I've learned a lot from this. I've made a ton of mistakes. So I'm hoping that what we've created for you today can actually help you, go through some of the pitfalls that I did and dug out on the other side. So Georgette, I'm going to let you just introduce yourself there, please.
Okay, well, I'm Dr. Georgette Clay. For the past 10 years, I've taught communications and linguistic courses at several universities in the New York area. Prior to that, as you mentioned, Colin, I was in sales. I worked in sales in the Phoenix area in real estate. I also sold bulk loans to mortgage companies with GMA CRFC. In 2016, I took a neurolinguistic practitioner course, and since then, I've kind of married some of these concepts with my experience and psychology and communication. So I'm excited to share what I've learned with you today.
Cool.
Fantastic.
We're pumped.
Okay, so let's jump right in here. Sorry, Colin, did you say something?
I said psychological what?
Oh, very good. So that's kind of a lot of people's first reaction is like psychological. What is this? And so this is basically stuff that you do on a day-to-day basis in any environment. No matter where you interact with somebody, there's psychology at play. It's like, what is the person thinking? Why are they upset? Why did they like what they did? All of this comes into play. And so whether you realize it or not, I mean, you're already, using psychology when you walk into a room, when you judge people, when you look at them, when you go into a sales situation and you're analyzing, what is it that makes this person tick? So you're already doing some of this stuff. So, that kind of answers that question. And, what does it all mean? It basically, it's using some common sense tactics as well as some pretty good learned behavior that can be taken to your advantage, excuse me, that allows you to be a better salesperson, to be a better negotiator, to be a better person in general. Because if you use these patterns and you understand the other people and you understand their motivation and not just view it from the side of, hey, I want to get something out of this deal and it's only about me, that may work in certain cases, but it's pretty much not going to. So you have to understand just kind of using some of the patterns and some of the things that we might speak about. And so how does it apply to you? It's basically in any situation, as I just described, whether it's sales, relationships, anything like that, you have to be able to understand the other participant in the conversation, the other participant in the sales side. And this is applied, not only to salespeople, but this can be applied to the person on the other side of the desk. So, you can be the person, you don't need to be a salesperson to apply these tactics. This can be, a buyer. This can be any kind of a negotiator. This can be an internal employee. Anybody in any environment where you have to negotiate or whether you have to get somebody, within your company or somebody on your team to do something that you want them to do. So it's either buying, selling, whatever, making the, getting that engineer to work for you to get the work done overnight. And why should you care? I mean, you really should, because if you want to be successful, you have to be a professional at your product. And salespeople, a lot of salespeople wing it. I did in my early days. I just kind of, I just wing it out there. Hey, I'm really good. God, people love me. Everyone's buying my stuff, and I don't need to know anything more. And that can change when you change. When you change different products or you get different responsibilities, all of this stuff can suddenly be like, whoa, this isn't as easy as I thought. So it's kind of like just, it's reevaluation, self-evaluation as we move through. So I'm just, I'm going to let Georgette just kind of explain a little bit further on sales psychology, and then she's going to move into some other things here.
Sure. Sales psychology uses the natural processes of the brain and the brain patterns to kind of play on a way to build and establish human connection. And it's how our brain works anyway. And it's basically using our understanding of those brain patterns to kind of tap into a deeper understanding and to build a deeper connection. And really, neurolinguistics builds on that because it works on these patterns of the brain. And when we think about neurolinguistics and sales psychology, we think about this aspect of building instant rapport. I mean, we've all heard of this thing, the concept that you never have a second chance to make a first impression. But what you get when you combine sales psychology and neurolinguistics and really hone in on who that other person is, you can establish that instant rapport. I'm sure all of us have met somebody where we felt like we were friends instantly, or somebody that we've known our entire lives. And so if we can pay attention to certain aspects of our communication and our behaviors that hone in on that aspect of instant rapport, then we can establish connections that can really build and propel our sales careers.
So what I love about this is that, like, sometimes I hear the vague advice of, well, to be a good salesperson, you have to use your empathy. You have to build your empathy and put it to use in your work. To some people, I guess it comes naturally, maybe, but this is a real skill. Like, there's a science behind this. There's a set of behaviors behind what makes two people click or not click. And like, so what you're talking about, sales psychology and the observations you've made, Georgette, is that this is like the how-to part of build your empathy or use your empathy. Is that basically it?
At the very, very most fundamental level, yes. I mean, neurolinguistics is such a huge topic. It would be, I would be remiss to say that this encompasses all of it. But just at a very basic level, these are some techniques that you can put into play that can really establish a connection with other people. And as this next slide says, it's like, have you ever noticed when best friends are together, they kind of look alike, they act alike, the old adage that birds of a feather flock together type of thing. And so what you want to do is you want to establish that connection, you want to establish that like with somebody else. In neurolinguistics, the techniques that we're going to talk about today are going to help to encourage that.
And just to jump in a little bit more on that point, that's all wonderful if you can find the person that's just like you, and that's the only person you have to sell to, or that's the only person you have to interact. That's not the case. What you have to do is you have to see how you can morph that relationship from dislike peoples and dislike personalities, and use these patterns to be able to create that similarity as if you were buddies and best friends. So you have to take the good examples of, birds of a feather, but also understanding that, cats and birds don't match, but you're still going to have to deal with a cat if you're a bird, and a bird with a cat. So you have to sort of figure out how, and that's some of the things we're trying to teach here, is how do you get yourself into that position where you are now, that similar personality to the person, even though you're very much different, but you still have to learn how to do that.
Got it. And I love that analogy of cats and birds. That's great.
And as Bill mentioned earlier, Tony Robbins built a billion-dollar industry based on these techniques. He goes around and he teaches workshops, and he teaches people how to incorporate these techniques to not only improve their lives, but also to become wildly successful themselves. So it's definitely founded on a great technique. and also Richard Bandler and Robert Cialdini. I tell you, if you don't have this book called The Psychology of Persuasion, you are definitely, you're running behind the pack here. These are great techniques that you can use and incorporate within your sales strategies to put your head above all of your competitors. So neurolinguistics has a nice established base, and we can see it's been the foundation of billion-dollar industries as well.
So two words that, well, a couple of words that Georgette mentioned there, which is, the neurolinguistics, Tony Robbins, billions of dollars. I mean, that should be enough to, to make people want to do this stuff. If they can build that on those kind of numbers and drive that kind of revenue, it's like, hey, maybe this is worth it might be worth my while to spend a little bit of time on this.
And really, rapport, instant rapport is established, and rapport in a relationship is built on trust. And your ability to trust somebody else, you're more likely to trust those that are like you than those that are dislike you. I can point to countless of examples, but one specifically is we see politicians when they are in the White House, they're wearing a suit, but when they go and they talk to the constituents in Ohio, they're dressed similarly because they want to mirror those people that they want to influence. So mirror and matching occurs in many different levels. You want to mirror the person that you want to emulate, that you want to build that connection with. And it starts at the really gross level. So it's mirroring those major body movements like we see here with Obama holding a jacket over his shoulder, and his constituent doing the same. It's the established patterns that build that connection.
Yeah, and these two are seasoned politicians. This is not by accident. This didn't just, they didn't just like walk out and throw the jackets over their shoulder. This is having, researched each other before the meetings. David Cameron, former Prime Minister of England, alongside Barack Obama, two pretty smart politicians. And they're doing this, they're not doing it subconsciously. The beauty of it is if you start to learn the patterns, soon subconsciously, you will actually start to do these things. And you won't even have to think about, prepping this. It'll actually start to come naturally, but it does take some work.
Sure.
So what are the actions? Like what are the steps? I mean, it sounds like it's kind of complicated, like without having to know, oh, here we go. These are the steps, I guess.
As we were just about to get.
Yeah. No, but
try to explain this.
Yeah, you bring up a great question because we haven't actually gotten into the details of it quite yet. But the idea is to mirror, match, and follow. And first, you want to mirror what it is that the person in front of you is doing in a very subtle way. You don't want to make it very obvious. You want to make it, subtle gestures that you're changing to match that person in front of you. Say they're crossing their legs. You want to, at some point, eventually cross your legs. Also, think about your communication patterns when you're talking to somebody on the phone. If you are talking to somebody that's regionally from the South, typically they have a slower dialogue. So you want to match that dialogue as well so that you're not over talking that other person. So really honing into what that person is doing non-verbally is the aspect of matching. Also, if they're sitting with their legs apart and their hands making a certain gesture, you want to eventually perform that gesture as well to show that you are like that person. When you match that person, you want to make sure that there's a little bit of a delay. So you want to match that person with a little bit of a delay of what it is that they're doing, so that it doesn't look too obvious that that you're copying their nonverbal behaviors. And eventually you want them to follow your gestures. So say you're speaking with somebody and you can tell by their furrowed brow that they are a little bit cautious of what you're saying. You can mirror that furrowed brow and then unlock your face, get them to match you, and then follow with a series of yeses with your head to get them to correspond your behaviors. And non-verbally, in a subconscious level, get them to go along with your idea or your concepts.
So when you say...
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Colin, sorry.
You had an interesting tip there, that it's a delay, that it's not, if Georgette, you're my prospect and you do this motion, that I immediately copy you and fold my hands, right? But when you say a small delay, is there like a science behind what's a good delay and a bad delay? How, what feels natural or?
It's kind of like more what feels natural when you would naturally change your position after, 50 seconds or so, less than a minute. You want to really kind of hone into that person and see what seems natural.
Okay. And then
And,
does
and
this go
Georgette
both
made a really
ways?
good point. Sorry, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I'll make this. So Georgette made a really good point when she talked about speech patterns, because this would be for BDMs who are basically working on the phone. Because if you're not in front of the person, you can't match the verbal, the body, the physical cues, but you can certainly match the verbals. So if the person, like Georgette said, if the person's from the South and they have a drawl, and I don't say you start changing your accent, but you slow your pattern down. If New Yorkers tend to rush, let's get to the point. So you have to understand once you've heard what the person is saying, okay, let me start to match them a little bit more, as opposed to just I have my script, I have what I have to get said to this person here, and I'm going to do it no matter what happens. You have to, even if it means not getting everything out, you have to sort of figure out how to match that person and speak in the same tone and intonations that they are as well. So that's just just for a pointer for people who are not physically face to face with the target.
All right, so interesting. So that, we hear a lot about personalization in things like email right now. That's actually a way to personalize your conversations. I mean, we all have the same conversations repeatedly, but if you listen the right way and find the tonalities or the pace, maybe even the phrases that people are using, and try to inject a little bit of that into your speech, you're saying that's like a way to personalize your approach to that person, and that makes a connection.
Yeah.
Not only personalized, but it works on your subconscious understanding of human behavior. Subconsciously, you are going to be drawn to that person that mirrors and matches what it is that you believe to be true, or what it is that you're projecting. So when you're mirroring that person, you're actually building that level of trust. They trust you because they think that you understand who it is that they are.
Right, and there are situations where I've had sales situations that were difficult where I was working with a pretty large financial services firm. They were incredibly difficult. They would yell, they would scream, they would do all of those things. But we had built I didn't yell back and sort of match them on that, but at least I maintained a steady focus on the way that they operated. And at the end of the day, I mean, they did a lot of business with us, but you have to kind of understand exactly the personality and match it to a degree, but not up to the point where you're challenging the person. So there's just different ways to do this. And also, one of the points you made about really listening. So that kind of gets to some of the next things that we have to say, which is kind of the use of the power of silence. You don't always, in a sales situation or in the conversation or in the negotiation, be getting the last word, speaking, saying everything. A lot of things can be achieved just by being in the moment. Again, going back to the birds of a feather, a lot of people who are really good friends, who are close friends, they can sit around. They don't have to fill dead air. And so you don't have to, always be saying something. And so long as you focus your attention on the client, don't be just, using the idea that everything that you have to say is more important. Gauge the person, look at the physical cues, see how they're acting, like Georgette said, and she'll show you a bit more about this, the furrowed brow, how are they appearing? And these are things that people may already be doing, but if you actually make a point of doing these things, you'll pick up on some basic little cues that you really weren't noticing before. Another thing we like to say is, the less you say, the less you seem foolish. That may seem counterintuitive, or it may just seem like a duh, but it truly is. Most salespeople just they have so much to say, and they know so much, and they're really, everything they have is like, yeah, this is the greatest. And sometimes just not always making that extra point can be much more beneficial. And I've done it. I've been in situations where I'm looking at the person, I'm not getting a reaction, and I'm like, probably just didn't say the right thing. I've got one more point to make. And it's not always the case at all. I mean, you have to basically know when to pull back. Same thing, choose your words carefully. Be very prepared. Obviously, never lie. Don't pretend you know some things about what your company does that you don't. Because if people are not stupid. you know, if you put yourself onto the other side of the desk, you know when somebody's not giving you the full, you know, straight details, and so that'll make them judge you poorly. So
So,
if you understand, sorry.
so when we put this in like a neurolinguistic or a sales psychology context, what does like if we have, you know, I've been in situations where I can ride in a car with my best friend for an hour and not talk, right?
Sure.
If we let a 7-second or a 10-second silence hang in the air with a prospect, what is that doing on a subconscious level between me and the prospect in our relationship?
You're actually starting to build a bit more. You're actually starting to build more rapport. It doesn't need to be filled. So, excuse me, and Georgette could maybe describe a little bit more about just how the silence was, and you know, even patterns don't require speech always. So, and that may sound a little weird, but you don't always have to be talking. What would you say on that, Georgette, in terms of just like letting time just be there? What's a good amount of time to let pass?
Well, I think we could kind of switch to our slide on facial expressions, and that could be kind of a good segue into that conversation, because there's a couple things that you can also take a look at when there is silence, and some of those things are the blink rate of the person that is in front of you. You can also take a look at, you know, this slide says that there's 53 facial expressions, so there's lots of different things that can happen within the face that you can hone in on to mirror and match as well. The blink rate, facial expressions, including how somebody is holding their mouth, or also, like I mentioned, the furrowed brow can also be a way that you can mirror and match somebody, even in silence.
The mirroring and matching, does this go both ways? Like if I'm sitting there and maybe I haven't yet actively tried to mirror or match my prospect, but I notice they're following me and they're already, you know, if I lean in, they lean in. What does that mean? Does this go two ways?
Sure. I mean, the goal is to get them to follow you eventually, so that you understand that your techniques or the instant rapport has been built. And really, we kind of look up to people. They say that imitation is a form of flattery. So, you know, when we admire somebody, we kind of look up to them in the sense of we kind of mirror what it is that they're doing. So we look for that person to kind of follow us eventually. And if they already are, then we know that we have that established instant rapport.
Got it. Okay, cool. Interesting. So that's the sign of success. That's the end goal. You mirror them, and then at some point it flips.
Yes, and you want them to follow you. Mm-hmm.
What's the point at which, how do you identify when to flip it? So if I've spent, let's say I have a half an hour face-to-face demo or sales meeting with a prospect, and I spend the first 10 minutes or so trying to mirror a couple of their expressions, their body language. At what point do I know to then look for them to start following me and mirroring my behavior?
At that point where you feel like you have established enough of the rapport, you want to wait a little bit into the conversation. It might not even be the initial conversation that you have them follow you. You might find that you need to build that rapport a little bit more. But at a certain point in the conversation, you'll notice a certain shift, and you'll want to kind of change your behavior to see if they follow you.
Got it. Okay. So it's kind of like I guess based on experience, really a little bit. It's like you kind of learn to identify it.
Yeah, that's kind of like what we're talking about, the idea that you have to practice these techniques, like even though they seem like they would be natural, or that they would be kind of no nonsense techniques. It's something to really practice, because you don't really want somebody to know that you're matching their behaviors, and you don't want them to know that you're trying to get them to follow you as well. So yeah, it takes a little bit of time. And, you know, even in the neurolinguistic practitioner course, we spent a lot of time looking at each other in our faces and trying to establish the changes and different dynamics. So, you know, it's so important in sales and communications to understand who the person is in front of you anyway. So incorporating these techniques can not only help you in sales, but interpersonal relationships as well.
Right, and again, just to reiterate, one of the things that we said is, you know, you got to practice this. You don't just, you don't walk into your most important client and say, "Let me try this out." That's the wrong time to be doing it. So,
Right.
you should take part of the team members, team building exercises are good. Like Georgette said, you basically you spend a lot of time looking at each other's faces, you understand, and you basically have to figure it out, because you don't try to do this on the fly.
Yeah.
You mentioned about some of the other things about the facial expressions. So eye movement is another one. How the person is looking up, down, whether they're, they look like they're focused, whether they're kind of glancing at other things. And, we're going to talk a little bit as well about, the way technology can get in the way. So if the person is checking the phone, if there's different things going on, you'll know that, what you need to change, you need to change up what's happening, personal demeanor, stuff like that. But remember that when you're doing what you're doing, when you're trying to get that person to match and follow you, you just have to be also careful of the cues you're projecting. So you need to have practice done on this in order to be able to actually implement it properly. And it's really fun. I mean, if you get people together at lunchtime and lunch break, or at a break from been making phone calls or meetings, and just practice a few of these things, it can actually be quite fun to do. And you'll actually find that it does have big advantages when you then get back out in front of a client.
Interesting. Yeah, I was talking to somebody the other day. I won't say their name, but they were telling me how they felt like they were very bad at sales, and so they were obsessively taking notes on everything that they did in meetings with their prospects, like everything that they said in addition to what their prospects said, even situations where like they adjusted their seat, like they were reading into that. I imagine that actually with the right mindset, those kinds of notes, if you've made notes on your prospects' behaviors, physical body language, eye movements, those kinds of things, that might be helpful. No, is that a helpful exercise just to start by taking notes and be a little more mindful of it?
If you're able to actually pay attention, I mean, it depends on how good a note taker you are, because the physical act of taking the note is distracting you from the interaction with the client. So that seems like a little bit of a tough one to do. Georgette, I don't know what, I mean, does that in turn itself become a major distraction just by the fact that you're writing because you're looking down versus, focusing with the client?
I don't think that would be too much of a major distraction. I think that more, if you have a cell phone out, it would be worse. So having a pen and paper would be definitely a handy thing, and jotting those things down would be certainly advisable. And, we know that if somebody's looking you in the eye, then they're more engaged. We know that if somebody's looking kind of down at the ground, they're not so engaged. So taking note of those types of responses, at what point they occur in your dialogue, can really have an effect. I mean, we can observe everything, but we have to have a strategy to our observations in order for them to be beneficial to our longevity.
And it varies by person, and not everybody's able to implement the same type of activities, same as another.
Of course. Yeah.
And then just to kind of delve a little bit more on that, so that just the whole act like royalty, get treated like royalty. So just again, it goes down to what it is that you're projecting and how you want that person to perceive you. So if you let the people walk all over you and you always say yes and you never push back, you got to my last point there, which is doormats don't get past the door. You basically are, just somebody that can't say no. I mean, and this is true in personal life too, but most specifically in business, people will not respect you. You have to be able to say, no, this is not something we can do. This is not a project that really works for us. Thanks so much, but we'll be back with, we'll be back to it when it really does make more sense. And just, you have to be able to understand that there doesn't always have to be yes, because even though you desperately might need that deal, it may or may not have any benefit to you. And the chances are that most likely, if it's a difficult client or something, it's going to take forever to get things implemented. You won't get paid. There's going to be any number of problems, and you're never going to be able to push back once you've already given in that first time.
Yeah.
And so we just, we put a couple of backgrounds here just as far as how you can just kind of map this thing out, just in terms of like, looking at a challenge and then just sort of figuring out, what is the pattern, what is the strategy? I mean, Georgette, what else would you add on this one here just real quickly? Is I know it's a placeholder, but it's basically just to map the direction that you kind of focus the client.
Yeah, so just making sure that you are staying on point with your client, that you're not getting too far off track in the conversation and dialogue.
Okay. And then we went over the facial expressions there, and just, the blink rate and the jaw, 10 squared. And these are stuff that you can actually, again, work with your own, coworkers on, and just get an understanding and practice this. And the whole thing is, the bottom line is, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to teach you how to master the art of seduction, so that anybody that you're attempting to close a deal with, that you're trying to sell something to, or that you're trying to befriend, or whatever the situation is, that you can take these techniques, looking at facial, using the mirror, using the match, understanding the person's psychology of what's in it for them, and turning that to your advantage, and being able to basically get the end result that you're looking to achieve.
So that's an interesting crossover or comparison, the art of seduction, because in dating now, a lot of it's done through text or apps and stuff. Similar to sales, not, I guess it depends on the industry, but not all sales are done face to face now. No. So when we talk about mirroring, are there any different ways that people need to think about this when they're selling through phone, or is it even possible to apply some of these principles to selling only through email?
So Georgette, I'll let you grab on that one, because I know you had some pretty strong points on that. Some views on that.
On using the sales techniques during email?
Yeah, and how, actually this slide speaks to how are these techniques impacted by the technology you're using or not using?
Well, it's just a matter of honing more into that human connection, finding more of the human connection instead of, having all of your contacts be through email. You might want to pick up the phone and try to establish a little bit more of a connection with your clients. And the impact of technology is that, we're physically and chemically addicted to our cell phones. And so when we are communicating with clients, when we're in meetings, it's really important for us to be cognizant of having that technology as a barrier. It's almost virtually impossible to see a text message come across your cell phone when it's sitting in front of you and not respond. So you definitely don't want to have that kind of impediment in your interpersonal interactions. So the impact of technology and using these types of techniques is to really just put the technology aside so much and really focus on that connection and making sure that you're establishing the friendship along with that sales aspect.
And so it's almost like part of the point of this is,
sorry, go ahead, Colin.
It sounds like part of the point of this is not that these are tricks that you can use any which way. It's that look, these are some of the fundamental truths of selling, that to establish rapport leads to good sales, and in order to establish rapport, there has to be some kind of person-to-person interaction, and that actually technology gets in the way of that. It sounds like basically your answer is, Georgette, that not a lot of this can be transferred to platforms like text or email.
Absolutely. You definitely want to use these techniques in person, or like I said, over the phone. If you're communicating with somebody and you're paying attention to their intonality and their speech patterns and their rates of speech, you want to kind of mirror that with your dialogue as well. But it's just an important reminder for us to come back to the understanding of talking to each other and how our nonverbals really impact that initial conversation and dialogue.
And one thing that you could do on the email piece, and this is where you could possibly make this put this into play. When you receive an email from a client, once you've received an email from a prospect or a client, you can determine based upon the way they write the sentences. So if a person is an abbreviated sentence writer, you don't send them back an email with 15 lines of text. You just don't. You can still match their style. I mean, this is not necessarily exactly what this means to do, but you can still match the style of the person who's communicating with you. So short sentences, reply with short sentences. Long sentences, reply with detail in long sentences. So you can sort of, put this into mind, because a lot of people, again, just like they want to do in person when they want to talk, they also want to make sure they get everything written down on email. Make sure you sort of match the person that you match the subject matter that came in from you in that email. And that sort of will build a rapport, because then you're being like that person.
Yeah, that's a great interjection.
And so in that case, Bill, we'd have a communication with them and then adjust our style. Is there a way to, before all that starts, right, to identify what style somebody is going to need, or are there personality types Or do I have to have this on a very individualized basis and adjust myself according to my interactions with that person? I actually put that question to both of you.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it's difficult. I mean, you can't, with social and a lot of the like information that exists out there today, you can, prior to interacting with somebody, know an awful lot of information about that person. So that may be one way of doing it. Not stalking the person, but at least getting information
Sure.
and
Learn
reading
about them a
that,
little bit.
and you can start to formulate. But then again, I would, defer to Georgette as to how you could then take that information of the person's personal life and try to formulate what they would be like to interact with in a professional world.
Well, I mean, part of it is really being a calm person yourself and approaching the situation knowing who you are, because then you establish a baseline of yourself and you can read others based off of who you are. If you go into a meeting and you're centered and you are really honing into that next person, then it doesn't take a whole lot of research or knowledge about their personal life for you to really gain that rapport. It's about going in and having that kind of humble attitude where you really want to know who that person is and kind of establish that connection. So I don't think there's really any shortcuts to it. I mean, it's like a fast-paced society, fast-paced technology, but really it's about building that connection. And for those clients that you have business with over 6 months or a year, you have that longevity, those initial connections are not necessarily about the deal. It's about establishing that rapport so that you can have the longevity that can be established based on whatever happens along the business end, because that's always fluctuating. So using these techniques, it's not a shortcut. And we can talk about if the person is an introvert, an extrovert, what type of family they come from. We could analyze somebody to the nth degree, but on a very basic level, we know that like attracts like. We know that people are drawn to those that are like them. So if we at a very gross level just mirror or copy or pay attention to what it is that other person is doing, and then we get them to follow us, then that's enough to establish a connection and the instant rapport that you need.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. So those no shortcuts, and this can be difficult if you're in a SaaS environment where you're basically dealing with high, low ticket, high volume. It can be difficult to get those established rapports. But if you're working with clients that you need repeat business with, then you absolutely have to use these practices. So just to move on here. So the reversing, sorry, Colin, anything you have?
No.
Okay.
I want to hear about the reversing the Napoleon complex.
So, this is just something that we, I kind of coined as an idea, which is that, Napoleon was an amazing person. He had just, amazing success. And then he also got, just the heck beaten out of him because, there were certain things that he did, certain things that he just didn't understand that allowed him to both be brilliant and be terrible at the same time. And so that's kind of what I decided or what I figured is the Napoleon complex, because a lot of salespeople can be really good at certain things. They can be really bad at other things, and understanding and knowing that your goods don't overcome your bads, and vice versa. Don't let the bad just completely overtake all of the good side of it. So you have to be able to, fully understand where you are, take the goods that you did and eliminate the bad. And if you do a lot of the things that Napoleon did wrong, these are things that are absolutely going to stop, your ability to be able to close deals, win new business and everything else. So the good Napoleon, one of the things he did, he split wars into winnable battles. So instead of attacking, all of Eastern Europe, he attacked country by country. So if you're attempting to get into a large corporation, instead of just going straight full barrel for the most for the biggest department and all of that, and responding to the largest RFP and then losing it, or getting in or not getting in, you basically have to work it into winnable battles, meaning just go department by department, establish relationships within different groups, establish the rapport, be using the patterns we talked about to actually get people that are influencers within those organizations to then use what they've learned from you to influence other people within the same organization. So basically, you end up having that person do your work for you by having, if you've trained them to mirror match and follow you, then hopefully when they project who you are to somebody else within their company, they're going to do exactly what it was that you wanted them to do in the first place. So you're training that person to basically, be you inside the organization.
Sure.
Using speed to dazzle. I mean, the last thing, again, this is just simple ideas, but Napoleon, one of the things he did was he would always be the first to the battlefield. And it was a case where his opponents and his adversaries, just like anybody you're dealing with in business, you've got to be quicker than them. There are no real token prizes for being second place, and just adapt to the changing conditions when you see that things are not working right. And one of the things that Napoleon just didn't get was, he kept going to places that he could never win. And so the reverse Napoleon is just, you don't believe in your own genius. Like I said, salespeople are really smart. We all think we know everything. We're, not very good at asking for help, because that's a sign of weakness, and salespeople can't be weak, because, then, we're going to be viewed terribly. But you have to actually understand, you can't believe in your own genius. Don't think that, you know everything. Go get the help, build a team around you. Again, be a general, not an emperor. He worked a lot. Some of his worst things that he did were when he was viewing himself as an emperor of this, massive empire, and didn't realize that generals know how to delegate, work with people around them, treat peers around them as people that are their equal. Same thing, stuff that he had done, which was, very successful. Success today does not mean success tomorrow. He was able to win certain battles. At the end of the day, those things didn't always end up being the thing. And one of his biggest downfall was he stopped trying to invade Russia. He really figured that Russia was the one thing that he wanted. That was the jewel in his empire. And he brought people in, and he had hundreds of thousands of soldiers going in, and he came back with tens of thousands of soldiers, because they were dying, freezing to death on the battlefield. So for salespeople, and I've done this where I've had this in my own organization, I've been guilty of it too. I want that biggest and baddest client for me. And the answer is, sometimes you're just never going to get it. It's just never going to happen. It'll sit on your progress report week after week after week, and it just doesn't go anywhere. So, stop trying to invade Russia, get out of there, go on to the next battle, and it'll be much, much better for you in the end.
Right. So we started out by talking about the psychology of the prospect and their behaviors, and now we're talking about, like you said, Georgette, coming into the conversation centered and knowing yourself and having the right intent. And Bill, it sounds like these points are all centered around that. Like, you need to get your own head right so that you're putting out the right signals, so that you're not coming in there shaking a fist like an emperor. You're coming in there trying to build a relationship.
Correct. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
And it's very important. I mean, in order to be able to, for psychology to work, man must know thyself. You have to. Yeah, absolutely.
Great.
So I guess this was, we're going to try to get folks to sort of understand a little bit. So Georgette, if you can just run through this.
So grounding conversations in NLP using the techniques of mirror and matching, always being aware of who it is that you're sitting in front of, and taking the grossest of their behaviors and nonverbal behaviors and putting those into your own responses. And then having a little bit of a delay where you match what it is that they're doing, but also allowing them to have the opportunity to follow you as well. Something that I felt passionate about, I spoke about, was removing cell phones from the picture and just really focusing on who's in front of you and listening with empathy and focusing on those physical cues.
And so you said, I may be skipping ahead here, I'm sorry, but I'm very excited about it. Georgette, you said you actually have exercises that you have done and that you can recommend to practice all of these things. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. Yeah, let's go to the assignment slide. So the assignment is to get others to follow you and to mirror and match them. And one of the ways that you do this is you find somebody that you feel as though is in a powerful position or holds a position of power. You might find somebody that's kind of dressed nice on the subway. If you could do this on the subway, you could do it on the bus. You could do it in a meeting where you're looking at your boss and you're kind of mirroring what it is that they're doing. So sometimes I've been on the subway where I've seen somebody somebody and they're dressed rather nicely, and I'll go ahead and cross my legs if they're crossing their legs as well. And then others will kind of follow that behavior if you're a little bit conscious of it. Others will pick up on that behavior and kind of match what it is that you're doing as well. I mean, think of it when how contagious a yawn is, or if you yawn and somebody's looking at you, you know for sure they're looking at you if they yawn too.
Right.
So, finding those times where you can kind of emulate somebody that you feel is in a powerful position. And I've done it on the subway. You might not be in New York. You might be fortunate not to take the subway. So you might find those places like on a bus, or you might find those places like in a meeting that you can practice those behaviors, and then see if you uncross your legs, if that person in the position of power that you've decided to emulate will also follow you as well.
Have you ever had anybody kind of catch you or like comment or show any sign that they thought you were mirroring them?
No, I've never had anybody comment. I've never had anybody, the most I've had is kind of like a meaningful glance. When somebody looks at you, they're kind of like, they look a little bit longer and you notice that they recognize you, type of thing, but never a negative response, because if you do it in a way that's subtle, you're not going to attract attention to what it is that you're doing.
And this is great to do, like, to sit and practice in the workplace. I mean, if you're really serious about your selling and you want to learn some of these things, I mean, practice. There's just no better way to do it than practice. I mean, so even if you don't take public transportation and you're not in a real interactive environment, you can still take 15 minutes with some of your coworkers and just practice these techniques. Practice inserting words patterns that you want. Practice the mirroring piece, and you'll find that it actually does work. And then when you go to a client site or you're speaking with a client, you'll be able to do this with comfort, and you'll actually find a difference. I mean, it does work. I mean, there's like Georgette said, in order to cover this topic, we need a full semester, but we're giving you the information as, we're giving you enough to make you successful if you go out and try some of these things yourselves.
And so we have a list of actions now. It's like match, find the right time in the conversation to pivot and try to get the person to follow you instead.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a list of behaviors to look for, like eye movement, how they're holding their mouth. Is their brow furrowed? Are they crossing their legs? What are their hands doing? Are they leaning backwards or forwards? The pace of their speech. These are all things that people can keep an eye on, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I've actually been wondering kind of throughout this whole conversation is, it sounds like the other person, whoever you're trying to mirror or get them to follow you, needs to be unaware that you're trying to do it, right? Like if I'm sitting down to practice this with my colleagues, do I have to do it when I can't sit down and say, hey guys, I'm going to mirror you now. Watch how this goes, right? Do they have to be unaware?
Georgette, so.
Well, they wouldn't be aware. I mean, if you want to practice, you should probably practice in a setting where you would be unobserved. But if you're practicing individually, with one or other person, then you can pay attention to those closer dynamics like the facial expressions. But if you're practicing in a larger setting, nobody will be aware of what it is that you're doing. You're just making subtle changes in your nonverbal behaviors that match the other person or mirror what it is that they're doing. So they're not going to be aware of what it is that you're up to.
Right.
Now you could still pick up on, you still could do this with coworkers for the physical cues and for having a conversation and make note on the physical reactions to the person. So the mirror and the matching part is a little different, but yes, for that, most certainly picking up on physical cues, you could absolutely do that in a work environment, but and just see how the other person's reacting, and if you're actually able to read the stuff.
Okay, interesting. So I think I found ways to sneak in most of people's questions while we were speaking. If we have a couple minutes, everybody, so if you have more questions that I didn't get to, or you just want to ask something related to neurolinguistic programming or sales psychology of Bill or Georgette, chime in now. Now's your chance. This is why you joined the live version. Oh, sales hackers, you're letting me down. All right. Oh, yeah, here's a great one. This is an awesome note to end on, actually. So are there any other good books about this that you can recommend, either of you? This is two people asked at the same time.
Okay. Well, Georgette, you know, you have a couple of favorites on your side. so
Sure. I would recommend anything by Tony Robbins. He has several books available. Awaken the Giant Within is a great one. I would also recommend, like I said, the one Robert Cialdini's, The Psychology of Persuasion. I would recommend that. And then Richard Bandler's book on a guide to self-transformation. Richard Bandler and John Grinder were the ones that originated the strategies of neurolinguistics, and they first started with self-help techniques. So those would all be a great foundation to start with if you're interested in learning more about those techniques.
And, you know, just to on top of that, I mean, I'm a big fan of anything from Malcolm Gladwell. He has some really good stuff. And it doesn't always apply to sales, but it really always does apply to interactions. And so they're really, the tipping point is one of the good ones. There was another book, and I can't remember the name of the author, but it was one of the best books I ever read, and which is shameful that I don't remember his name, but it was Negotiating to Yes. And it was written by a group of people who actually negotiated a Middle East peace treaty back in the 80s or something. And it's a little deep, but it's really spectacular. So Negotiating to Yes.
Yeah, Getting to Yes. Is that what it's called?
Getting to Yes.
Was it Getting to Yes? I thought it was Negotiating to Yes, but maybe Getting to Yes.
I have it on my bookshelf over there.
It's, again,
that is a fantastic
really
book.
Yeah.
Also, Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. Have you heard of Napoleon Hill?
No, I didn't. That's a new one for me. I'm actually going to read that down.
Over the course of 10 years, he interviewed all of the great leaders of the time, and he narrowed down their successes to these techniques. So,
interesting.
Very, very interesting.
All right, Mike Jackson and Carmen, hopefully that answers your question about the books. I hope that was helpful. If you missed any of that, you couldn't jot any of them down, just remember we are sending out this recording tomorrow, so you can check it then. You can share it with everybody. Make sure that Bill and Georgette's genius advice gets spread around wide and far. These are all things that I think, you know, the world would be better if we all just spent a little bit more time being people with our prospects, connecting with them, building instant rapport, being maybe a little more in tune with ourselves as sellers too. I think we would all be better off. Bill, Georgette, any last words for the people?
No, thank you. Thanks for tuning in.
Just, I guess, well, kind of everything you said, but just, know yourself and know your client, and you'll be the richer for it.
That's what it's all about. All right. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. Thanks, Georgette and Bill.
Thank you. Thank you, Colin.
Thanks so much. Thank you, everybody.
I'll see everybody soon.
Okay.
Thank you so much, guys.